welcome to Grognards of Gaming. I'm the co-host with the biggest mouth, Rob the Grognard Dog. And with me actually in the room, unusual, not quite as always, is our newest co-host,
GMJB.
And my usual partner in crime,
Miracle Mike.
So Don Paulie couldn't make it tonight, though he will be back for future episodes as his availability permits. So he did, however, provide me with an outline of his main points, which he and I have discussed at some length in the past and over time. So I have an idea, I have a sense of his points and where he's coming from. So I'll be actually acting in a second capacity in today's episode as devil's advocate by proxy, and that will be Paul is the devil's advocate, I will be his proxy. So after I and the other Grognards have had our say about today's topic, I'll raise Paul's famous counterpoints on this topic, and we can discuss them.
Counterpoint.
Point counterpoint. John, you ignorant slut.
Shayna, they knew what they were doing when they bought the tickets. I love that scene from it's from Airplane.
Airplane, right? So when we last left off, when we last left off, we had interviewed Scott Lightmane Meineke, and because we had that unique opportunity to talk to him last episode, we preempted what Paul had suggested for our next topic, so we're going to actually do that today. And the topic that he had suggested 2 episodes ago was running or participating in an episode 0 for your campaign. So we're gonna talk about that today. So since I'm going to be filling in for Paul at the end, let me just kick things off by, as we usually do, defining what I think of when we use the term episode 0. And then I'll just turn the discussion right over to you guys to make any alterations to that definition that you see fit, and then you fellas can just jump right into your own points, and I'll participate in the discourse accordingly. So when I hear the term episode 0, the concept of an episode 0, I'm thinking of a gathering of the GM and all of the players of the campaign, and it's intended solely, or at least primarily, for the purpose of preparing for the upcoming campaign by doing a number of things. Number 1, openly discussing and collaborating on character generation. Number 2, linking the player characters' backstories. And 3, sometimes generating the setting together. And number 4, maybe even coming up with some story ideas that might be tailored to your character concept and that sort of thing. If after this pre-game discussion is finished and there's still some time to kill, maybe, if he feels comfortable doing so, the GM can also run a little intro for each of the newly created PCs or for the party as a whole, just off the cuff, just to whet the appetite, not really doing anything pre-prepared or substantive. Okay, so that's my long-winded definition. What do you guys think about that definition? Is there anything you would change or add to it or take from it or what?
No, that sounds pretty complete. I think there's detail there we'll probably go into, but that sounds pretty much what you take care of in session 0.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that that's pretty complete. I mean, there are nuances, but yeah, that's a good definition.
Okay, great. All right, so then let's jump into the substantive discussion. So, what are your guys' thoughts first on the utility of running such a game pre-session, and what are your experiences? So, go ahead. I'll leave it to you guys.
We actually had an instance of this just recently. I was wanting to run a Modifius rule set for Dune, and we had decided, or I had decided, I feel comfortable doing that first because I wanted to see what characters people would come up with, and that speaks to one of the points you made about kind of creating characters. I wanted to see what characters you'd bring to the game so that I could create the first session. I knew what in general I wanted to do as a story, but the session itself, something more strategic as far as the ideas about what I would do with those characters combined with each other, and it would give me ideas for maybe changing that a little bit. So it actually, in that sense, benefits the GM because he comes a little bit more forewarned about what the players expect and what the characters might be involved with. So I think that actually is something that's very helpful. And I'll actually ask the question, I think what you were getting at was why do you want to do a session 0 as opposed to, I think when we were all younger, people gathered around, everybody ran one of the 5 or 6 different types of characters in original D&D, and then you had a dungeon you walked into, and there was no discussion of what kind of dungeon even. It was just all there, But I think through the years, we've developed more an idea about telling a story rather than just going in and hack and slay, I think what we used to call it. And it matters what the characters want, and maybe they want to have some input into how the game actually proceeds, the creative part of how the game proceeds. Right, Mike, what do you think?
So, and it's interesting because when I was thinking about this, it's interesting, JB, that you bring up, back in the day, because I'm thinking that we did have episode or session 0 back in the day, early on. It's evolved, as you say, but think about, and again, Robert knows how my memory is. I remember cracking that first basic D&D box, and taking the crayons to the dice, and then sitting around a table and going, figuring out, and this is part of it because some of it is strategic. What does everybody want to play? Because we don't want everybody playing the same thing. We want some variety, and somebody may want to play something and have be central as a magic user, or central as a fighter, or central as a rogue, and things of that nature. And in some ways, I think of that as kind of a session 0, because you're getting together and you're figuring out a strategy of what you might enjoy playing, and things of that nature. Now it's grown from a standpoint of, what kind of story do you want? Do you want puzzles? Do you want hack and slash? Do you want narrative? What do you want? Do you want discussing? Some of the more, more recent, and when I say more recent, it could be the past 5-10 years, things like, safety checklists and things of that nature. Now, the other interesting part, like we did the session 0 for Doom, which was, again, a little bit of comfort for you as the GM, JB, and a little bit of comfort for us to see where everybody else, again, we were all thinking about our characters and things of that nature. It's not necessarily maybe a new system, because it's a similar system to other things we have used, but some of the rules are different, and some of the customizations are different.
Right. I think in this case, it's mostly the customizations of. We had been playing in a Star Trek game briefly in a Star Trek game, which was Modiphius, but they tweaked some of the rules for Dune and changed things a little bit. But I think that's what you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah. Correct. Now, we don't often use them. Like some of the Fate games, we just go and make our characters on our own, and we, bring all the stories back to Rob. Sometimes we may talk with each other and things of that nature, which is fine because we've been playing together for so long. I think it is, we've talked recently about running at cons and things of that nature. For something like that, I think a session 0 is essential, because then you'll get an idea of the variety of players and the variety of likes and dislikes that you may run into, at least from a small scope, so that you can adjust, either your play or your story, depending on what you're running for people that you may not know.
All right, so that's interesting, Mike. So talking about running a session 0 for a con, I want to address that third. I just want to address, before we go any further, two things that Jonathan said that reminded me. I think that, and we've mentioned this in previous episodes of Grognards, how gaming has evolved. That back in the day, it was pretty much hack and slash. It was very gamist or simulationist at best. And as time went by, it became more narrativist. And so I think with the advent of that narrativist gaming, it's made more sense to have an episode 0 because story is more. It has become more important. Whereas back in the hack and slash days, you didn't quite need it so much. The other thing that Jonathan said, I lost it. I don't remember the second point that I wanted to make. But the thing that you had said about running an episode 0 at a con, at a con, let's say you, Mike, agree to be a GM at the con, and you're going to run, let's say, Star Trek Adventures at a con, and so Jonathan and Paul and I, we're the folks that sign up, and you don't know us, and we sign up, for like Saturday at 10 a.m. That's when your game is going to be. So we show up at Saturday at 10 a.m., and you've got a 4-hour slot to run your game. How do you run an episode 0?
No, that's a good question. And again, I'm not the most experienced with cons. We know this. And I don't know if there's, an advanced virtual thing, something that can be done by email, not necessarily at the time of the con. But I'm also thinking that some of the cons are not just a single, and I've seen some, not just a single day game, but a multi-day game. And I've seen some of those as well. But also when you're thinking about this, as an example, not necessarily a con, but I have, there is a gaming store not far from where I am, and you guys are probably around a lot of gaming stores, that occasionally may run gaming nights or RPG nights on a regular basis, once a week. And when you come in, so when you're gathering a new set of players, again, a session 0 would be something that you would want to run as you're continuing through something like that. Now, short term, maybe not. And we've talked about some of this where it's not necessarily session 0, but at least nowadays, with the advent of the internet, if you're running a game on short notice, 4 hours on a Saturday morning, whatever it happens to be, usually there's a bio with the game master or the dungeon master, whatever you want to call them, to help you decide if their style of GMing meets your style of play. So that's a little more, in place possibly of a session 0.
Okay, that was a really interesting idea. I would not have thought of that. Like, who the people are who are signing up. You might, on the sign-up sheet, if you have the capability of doing this, ask them for contact information, or you could post your Discord link or something, and then you could make a pre-convention meeting with the players that you're going to play with at the convention and have your episode 0 that way. So that's a very clever idea. And the reason, by the way, for our viewers, the reason that Jonathan is in the room here with me is because he has come to Philadelphia for the weekend, because we're actually attending PAX Unplugged tomorrow. And so speaking of cons.
I think that it would. I understand where Mike's coming from there. It would be difficult to do, but not impossible. A lot of times when sign-ups happen, they don't happen right away. People sometimes skip a game. Sometimes you have open slots right up until the time the game starts. So you might not always have a chance to do that. I was thinking you would at least have a chance for a few minutes beforehand to do a brief sort of session 0 to make sure you understand what people really want out of the game. I've never really seen that happen before, but I could imagine where you could definitely take 15, 20 minutes and discuss around the table what everybody wants. It would be a little bit more like what you were talking about, I guess, originally back in the day when we played D&D, either the basic or the advanced, there was a point in the first game where everybody just wrote their characters up and people discussed what they wanted to play and what they didn't want to play as far as the characters were concerned. It didn't much go into the storyline as far as what they wanted to play that way, but I could see it being more like that, where as everyone's kind of like either getting their pre-written characters or writing up a character really quickly for the convention game itself, you might have a discussion like that around the table and just go around and give everybody an idea about what you kind of see, what you want from it. Actually, no, that's not true. I did see that once. There was a it is D&D. Is it Beyond?
Mm-hmm.
There is an ongoing kind of living D&D, Living Dungeons and Dragons kind of game. I and a friend of mine named Michael played, not this Mike, but another Michael, played in a game convention in Marstown. And they did go around the table and have everybody introduce themselves and introduce the character. And in that sense, they were kind of introducing everybody to each other. But you could do something like that and actually maybe add the question, what do you expect out of a game? You know, what do you most enjoy? And that could be sort of a micro kind of session zero going on at a convention, possibly.
Yeah, that's a good point. That and I'm going to just say my mnemonics ahead of time so I don't forget. But I want to make the point of getting players invested in the game for a con, and also the 20-minute session. So I've actually done the 15 to 20-minute session at a con. So I ran at a con.
I didn't realize that.
I did. I've run at a number of cons actually, and one time I brought my Fate books and I did not prepare anything. What I did was I came with about 5 or 6 potential adventure seeds that could be done in any genre. And I sat down at the table and I advertised it as the game for those who are floating. So people who came to the con and they had an hour to kill at this time and they weren't registered, or they tried to register and you couldn't get into the game, or you registered for a game and it got canceled and you just have some time to kill. I'm your guy. Come sit at my table and I'll run a Fate game for you. And so it worked well. Had a little sign on the table explaining all of this, and people would come up and be like, "Oh, you're willing to run a game right now? I have like a couple of hours to go." And I'm like, "Yeah, sit down." And so I would fill a table. I'd get like 2 or 3 people around the table, and then I would say, I would hold an episode 0. I'd say, "All right, what genre would you guys like to run in?" And everybody like, "Really? Like any genre? You're not telling us the genre?" I'm like, "Yeah, you pick the genre." And so like one guy would say like fantasy, and somebody else would say steampunk, and somebody else would say science fiction. I'm like, "All right, let's see if we can come to a consensus." And we would mediate among the 3 separate genres. We'd come to like some consensus. It would be like some kind of futuristic steampunk that was more sword and sorcery like Star Wars than it was like science fiction. And then we'd all create characters. And because Fate is so easy, everybody was able to create a character and learn the system within like a half hour. And so by the end of that half hour or 20-minute episode 0, we had picked our genre, we had come up with character concepts, we had rolled up our character, and while they're all doing that, I'm scribbling notes from my 5 adventure seeds and I'm tailoring it to fit the setting. And a half hour in, I was ready to run, and I would run an adventure for them. And I think I did 2 or 3 of those for this one particular con, all in one day, or maybe it was over the course of 2 days, and it worked super well. So I've actually done that, and that's a good idea, Mike, and it reminded me that I've actually done it. So it does work.
That actually works. It really depends on the system, and Fate lends itself to that. As a matter of fact, part of Fate is when you're reading the core book is they suggest doing it that
Correct.
way. That might actually fit in with
Well, before we move on to the next point, I just wanted to make one other point, which was if you do an episode 0 virtually pre-con, if you're running at a con and you do you can actually you might actually get players more invested than they might normally be because they've already met you, they've already had input in the way the story's going to go. So it's less likely that they're going to you're going to have dropouts of the game like you might otherwise.
That's true.
That was the other point I wanted to make. All right, so go ahead.
There is a couple of times I've seen, and I think this mostly happened because of coming back out of COVID. There was a local convention in Marstown that was trying to kind of feel out whether or not there were going to be enough people for a full convention. So they had what they called, it was DexCon, and they had something called Dex Lite. And one of the aspects of Dex Lite, which is passed on to the full convention they had the following year, was this thing called Spark Games, which were just what you're talking about, which was you could actually suggest, I want to play this, or I want to run in this, and you would actually have a bulletin board, and I think they did part of it online, where you could communicate with people and say, let's get together and do this. Do you have these rules? You want to play these rules? And it all actually came to fruition after the beginning of the convention, and not so much weeks before the convention started, and people would, say, I want these 4 hours to run this game, and I've got characters already for people. So it was much more fluid, and I think fun in a certain way. I ran a couple of those where I said, I want to run a Star Trek game, and this is what I want to set it in. Who's interested? And you get people who know what they're getting into, and so that becomes kind of like a little bit of a session zero, where everybody sits down and introduce themselves, and we get characters set. That just it feeds into that, I think, a little bit. It's a good idea, actually. I never thought of doing that with a Fate game before. I mean, at a convention.
Now, I know not a lot of our viewers probably are convention goers. You may not live in a part of the world where you have access to a lot of conventions, that sort of thing. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about cons, but even just around the regular gaming table, I think nowadays, and Mike sort of clued me into this, nowadays, because we're gaming more online, and we're gaming with people outside of our neighborhood, outside of our culture, outside even of our own moral codes sometimes, it might be more important now than it was back in the 80s and 90s when we were more insular as gaming groups, to set expectations for the campaign, and to set boundaries, and maybe even safety tools. Because if you get someone from, you get a couple of people from two cultures that have like almost opposing values, you can have problems. You can start arguments among the group and that sort of thing. So if you have an episode 0, that sort of it's a way to sort of pave the ground that we're all going to play on, so that everybody's a little bit more comfortable, and we're not stumbling over rocky terrain where you get into kind of a culture shock. So, what wasn't a big deal in the 80s because you were only playing with guys in your neighborhood, now you're playing with somebody halfway across the world. So an episode 0 could be helpful in that respect. So, yeah, I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Mike?
No, I said agreed, and I'm even thinking about it because, like you said, in the 80s it was very insular groups. In most cases, it was, there was no internet, there was no long distance. It was, a bunch of people in the neighborhood that you interacted with on a regular day. So a lot of the cultural norms and everything were already there, and the understanding was already there. So right. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. I think we probably already touched on this point, but maybe this is a nuance that is worth giving its own particular focus to. Establishing group dynamics and roles in the group. So, we talked about now that things are more narrativist. It helps to have an episode 0 so that you can create backstories, which have become more important than they used to be in the hack and slash days and the gamist days and the simulationist days. And if you're going to do that, you may as well tie the characters together to streamline the storytelling, so that you don't have to have the characters meeting for the first time as the story begins. You can already begin with established bonds among the characters. But even to more finely tune that point, nowadays, like let's take Dungeons and Dragons for example. Back in the day, you had a fighter, you had a thief, you had a cleric. Now you have multiple types of fighters. You've got the archer specialist, you've got this type of fighter, that type of fighter. So you can use the episode 0 to avoid stepping on each other's toes. Two people can come to the table saying, I want to play a fighter, and then you can use that time to go, all right, well, what kind of fighter are you interested in? Oh, you're interested in the archer. Well, all right, yeah, then I won't. I'll try to avoid the archer archetype. But what else can I do? I could do a sword master, or I could do a hand-to-hand combat specialist. Or you, more broadly, you could sit around the table. I think this is more important now than it was in the old days as well, because now Dungeons and Dragons, for example, is built so to have certain types, certain classes in the group. And if you don't have a cleric, for example, you could be at a severe disadvantage in a modern D&D game. Whereas back in the day, probably not so much. It was, it was a little, it wasn't quite as strict.
They give you options nowadays too, because they do have a certain amount of healing in some of the other classes, so you don't actually have to have a cleric there all the time. Plus, they're magic items too.
Okay, well then, to my point then, if you all sit around the table in episode 0 and nobody wants to play a cleric, then you could start to brainstorm. Jonathan could say, well, there's this other class, like in the magic user class, you've got these options for healing, and then you can hash that out, and an episode 0 would be the perfect time to do that. And establishing group dynamics. If you've got a demonic, if you've got a warlock who's getting his powers from a demonic source, and you've also got an Aasimar in the group, you might need episode 0 to figure out how you're going to navigate that in character. So
it's also important when the GM says, well, there's going to be a lot of combat in this, because I like running combats. So you better have some fighters, because we've had groups that have gotten together and suddenly we realize there's no heavy hitters.
Right.
And so that completely affects what the GM is going to be able to do.
Right.
Or have a party kill, a total party kill, which right. That can be fun too.
That can be fun, but for those aspiring GMs out there, I recommend maybe presenting the players that don't have any bricks, who aren't playing any bricks, or aren't playing any heavies. You might want to gear the story to a more cerebral type of story, like the librarian and the lost spear. What was that TV show on Sci-Fi Channel?
It was called The Librarian.
The Librarian,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So it would be like kind of adventure stories with daring do and not quite so much fighting.
I seem to remember back in college we actually had something like this happen where someone had suggested, and it was when they first started introducing multi-classing, that essentially everybody was a thief. We were all thieves because we were all going into a place that wasn't ours, and we were taking things and killing people for it. So we decided everyone was going to multi-class as partially as a thief. Fighter thief, magic user thief. I don't know if the cleric was able to do it as well, but that type of thing. So we just decided we were all going to be part thieves.
That's a very postmodern mindset.
We're all thieves.
Well, if you really think about it, and again, think about it that way,
really?
A little bit tangential. If you go back and look at Conan.
Oh, yeah.
Conan
Well, I think we got it from
thief.
that. Yeah. We got it
Conan
from
was
that.
considered a thief.
Yeah.
So, barbarian thief.
Barbarian thief, right.
Right. Another benefit, I think, of an episode 0 is you can introduce house rules and mechanics there. And this is something I took for granted, but I learned the hard way that it might be worth, if you're going to have house rules and house mechanics, it's probably best to run it by your players ahead of time. And here's why I say that. I ran a Star Wars Saga Edition game when Wizards of the Coast first came out with the Saga Edition. And it was when I moved back to Philadelphia from our New York days. I gathered a group of Star Wars aficionados that I had found online from meetup.com. And I said, hey, I'm interested in running a Star Wars Saga Edition game if whoever's interested, So I got like about eight players just by doing it that way, and people were very excited. And so I started running this game, and we got to a point where I think someone was injured, and we had to figure out how we were going to do like some sort of field medic situation to save this person's life. And someone in the group, these were people who didn't know each other prior to gathering around this room, and so someone in the group, we were looking through the book because we were all kind of new to the Saga Edition rules because we had played the 3rd edition rules in New York. So we're kind of looking through the book and we're fumbling through the book, and so one of the players who was the more narrativist inclined role player said, you know what, let's not do it this way. This seems pretty complicated. How about we just and he proposed a house rule that was much simpler. And I said, as the GM, I said, okay, that sounds good. Let's do it that way. And I just assumed everybody was going to be on board with that. Oh no, because there was a player in the group who was more of the simulationist, gamist type, and he spent a lot of time, invested a lot of time and a lot of effort into learning the Saga Edition rules as best he could, so that he could really play the game. And he objected. He said, now, wait a minute. If we're going to do it that way, then we're not really playing Star Wars Saga Edition. And quite frankly, you build this game as a Star Wars Saga game. So are we going to play Star Wars Saga, or are we going to play something else?
Is there a lawsuit proposed?
I know. It seemed a little officious, but I understood his point.
I'm going to sue you.
And I said, all right, I hear both sides. And I said, all right. So let's do it by the book this time, and we'll think about if we want to streamline things, and I won't force a home rule on you. So I didn't really. It never occurred to me that someone would have that reaction, but he had that reaction, and he was not an unreasonable guy, by the way. I mean, he actually of that whole group of people, he ended up being like one of the guys I liked to game with the most, and continued playing with him in other games. So, he wasn't being unreasonable. I thought it was actually a good point. But you can hash all that stuff out at an episode 0 and say, hey, listen, I think, we're playing Ars Magica, and the combat system is just ridiculous for the 3rd edition. So, I'm going to run a 3rd edition Ars Magica game for you all, but I'd like to use the 2nd edition combat rules, because they're much simpler and more streamlined. And then if anybody's got any objections, you're not in media res. You can resolve it before you start the campaign. Any thoughts on that, gentlemen?
I could see, if you're talking about the point you're making about whether or not to do that, or are you saying whether it's useful to be able to bring up points like that?
Either way.
I've had actually somebody ask me about rules like that, saying Michelle was very good about, why do we have to follow this rule, because it's too complicated. And I would say, because the game's balanced out that way, and I don't want to imbalance it, and I don't know enough about the specifics of the game and the mechanics to be able to change something like that and not know that I'm throwing something completely out of whack. Which was my way of saying it's my ball, and no, but I can see both sides of that as saying, if you change the mechanic, aren't you changing the game? But on the other hand, we want to make it fun for everyone, and I don't want to sit here and have to pour through rules, which is one reason why you always get the rules lawyer in the game, because that person you could just turn to and go, what's the answer?
What's the answer, yeah. Yeah, and this fellow was that person. He wasn't a rules lawyer in the negative sense of the term, but he like I said, he spent a lot of time learning the system, and he was the guy to ask whenever. So anyway, all right, so are there any other points we want to make before we bring the voice of Paul and his dissension into this?
And I knew he was going to be dissenting because he was the one that didn't really want to do a session 0 of Dune. I'm going to point out before he makes his points that he thoroughly enjoyed that session 0.
He did.
And so I'm going to preemptively say, ha!
Well, you don't have to say that, because Paul's 4th point actually is that.
Oh, okay.
So I'll jump to Paul's 4th point. He says, my only pro is that rare time where we need to collaborate, as in designing the minor house for the Dune game. That was fun. So cool. He acknowledges that was fun. But I just want to make sure that there wasn't anything else you guys wanted to address before. Okay, so here are Paul's 3 dissenting points. His 4th point was conceding that, all right, all of that said, it's still fun. Here's that is to be said. Number 1, he feels that there is too much time creating than actual playing. And listen, I understand this point, because right after I left New York and came back to Philadelphia, Phil, and the viewers will remember Phil was my original co-host for Grognards of Gaming. Phil had been running during our years in New York. He had been running a very long Ars Magica campaign.
Came in at the tail end of
Yeah,
that.
you came in at the tail end of that, but it was glorious, wasn't it? Even at the tail
Even
end.
at the tail end.
It was a glorious
really, really good
campaign.
game.
And but then when I left New York, everybody else started leaving New York, and that was like sort of the beginning of the end of that group. But Phil and his wife really lamented the loss of that community. They really missed that community. So Phil reached back out to me and he said, you know, Dana and I really miss having that community that we used to have. And so I'm thinking of maybe continuing like a second incarnation of the Ars Magica campaign. I know that you're 2 hours away from New York, but would you be willing to come up like once a month and we'll continue the campaign? I was like, sure, you know, like I could drive to New York from Philadelphia once a month. That wouldn't be so bad. And so we did that for a while. It didn't last very long, but we did that for a while. But the thing with Ars Magica is there are 2 types of sessions that you can have. You can have a role-play heavy session, or you can have a lab day where all of the players sit around the table and they decide what you're going to do for the summer season, what you're going to do for the winter season while you can't really go adventuring during the winter, and then what we're going to do until the thaw, and then when the thaw comes, then we can pick up with the Daring Do adventures. And even when we were playing every week and I was living in New York and it was only a 30-minute subway ride from my apartment to Phil's apartment, I still hated those lab days around the table because I was hankering to play, to role play. And so it was exacerbated when I was traveling there only once a month and I was going 2 hours. I did not want to sit around the table and talk about what we're doing like throughout the winter, like what lab experiments we're doing in the Covenant lab.
Or a mage council pops up out of nowhere.
Right, or a council, right. I wanted to get right to the adventuring. So I understand Paul's point, but that said, my counterpoint to that would be, it's only one session, and hell, session zeros can be so much fun. It's not like the lab day in Ars Magica where you kind of do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of is.
Well, it's also not in the middle of the game. It's at the beginning of the game.
Right.
Right.
Another good point.
I could point out too that it creates a kind of like kinetic energy. I don't know if that's the right word, but you can create a kind of energy of excitement with people as they kind of rebound ideas off of each other, and then somebody says, "Oh yeah, well, we can have our 2 characters be this, or brothers, or half brothers, or we could have been in the war together," and then they start. You can really get people going on details about the backgrounds of their character, and that can be fun because then that just thrusts you right into the game once the first game comes. And everybody's ready for it, and that can be really exciting.
For sure, although that does depend on the interpersonal dynamics among the players.
True.
If the players are strangers and they're not real comfortable with each other, the chances of getting that kind of kite in the air so fast, that kinetic excitement is a little less. But if you're like old friends like we are, yeah, sure, like we're going to sit down and you're going to say, I think I want to play a detective, like a 1940s hard-boiled detective, and then I might go, oh, can I play your Guy Friday? And you're like, yeah, you know, and it's like that guy. And I'm using that example because that's exactly what we're doing at a PAX game that we both signed up for tomorrow. Jonathan said he wanted to play a hard-boiled detective, and I said, I'm going to play your Gal Friday, and so we're going to do that. So that's going to be fun. Yeah.
Now, one other thing, we've talked about this before, and I understand Paul's point of that, you know, about not actually playing. But the other thing that you have to understand from Paul's perspective, and we've said it many times, Paul is our character master. Paul is the depth of his characters, the length of his characters. By the time he comes to the first session,
he's got everything.
He's got 6 pages of material on his character.
See, that I mean, he did that with the Dune game. I'm not saying it was bad, but he had his character.
But he had he had everything set out, which in some ways defeats the purpose of a session 0 from character interaction perspective.
Right.
And it's a style, and we love the style because it's like the depth of his characters is like you can do so much.
Plot hooks are go, man.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is wonderful. But that, you know, if you are that type of player, if you are the type of player where, you know, you're going to build a legacy with your character right up front. Session 0 may be challenging for you from the perspective of, well, how do you know the other characters or not know the other characters? What's the party dynamic going to be like, and things of that nature. So that part I do get about it. So
that is an excellent point, Mike, and I think probably we'll move on from point one so that through Mike, Paul gets the last word on that. That's a very good point. I had not thought of that. All right, so Paul's second point is as follows: any special arrangements between the player and the GM, or secrets that need to be kept from the other players, are now in the open. And yeah, Paul's right about that. And I gotta say, pre-Fate, before the Fate system came around, that was I was of that mindset too. I used to like to have secrets from the other players, little side deals with the GM, little surprises that would come out later on. I've told many times on Grognards the story of the Traveler game that John Sloan ran for us, where I played the doctor, and he betrays the party, and everybody thought it was cool except for Michelle, whose character my character betrayed. I used to love to do that stuff. And then when Fate came out, Fate made me look at the collaborative storytelling process differently, and it was like, there's full transparency with Fate. Like, everybody knows everything, and you're separating character knowledge from player knowledge, and we expect you to be able to do that. And not everybody likes doing that. So I really see Paul's point. Now, you can still keep secrets. You could still have an episode 0 and keep secrets. But I think Paul would say, yeah, but now everybody around the table knows that you've got a secret. They may not know what it is, but they know that it's there.
I hope this doesn't lengthen things out more than it needs to be, but I'm going to make a point and do it through a movie, as I normally do. There's a point Alfred Hitchcock used to make, and this is about keeping secrets, about the shock jolt that they do. They have like shock value of some scenes in films, which he was against, because you could have like a jump scare. Like, you have two people sitting eating dinner, and then after a few minutes a bomb goes off and they're both blown up because there was a bomb under the table. And that's great. You get like a few seconds. And if you show that there's a bomb under the table and people are sitting and eating, and then they eat for 5 minutes and the audience knows there's a bomb under the table, they'll have 5 minutes of tension of, don't just sit there eating, there's a bomb under the table.
That's a good point.
So you get tension for 5 minutes. Now, if everybody knows, instead of keeping a secret and then suddenly revealing a secret, everybody can play with that and go, oh, he doesn't know what he's all about, and look at this scene where we know he's lying to him. So you're kind of, I think sometimes secrets are a little selfish. It works sometimes, but it really only gives you one moment of reveal. But if you've got an entire game where everybody realizes, my character, when I played in one of the later Ars Magicas, was obviously an evil character.
Yes.
And everybody knew he was an evil character,
yeah.
but he pretended not to be, and everybody played with it, and
Right.
it was really fun.
Right. The players knew
The players
he was evil.
knew he was
the
evil.
characters that we were playing didn't know.
So you know as an audience what's going on, and you know what's going to happen or what's probably going to happen, but the characters don't. And I think that it can be a lot more fun when you play with the open secret rather than that. But that has to be decided. And again, bringing it back to session 0, you really need to decide what you want to do, you know, how you want to handle that. And there are players who don't enjoy doing that. You're right. So you have to deal with it. But I think with a secret in a session 0, you can just take it into another room and everybody knows there's something going on, but they don't know what it is.
And again, it doesn't have to be, and I don't know that secrets all have to come out in a session 0.
Yeah.
And because it's, you know, there's things that we did in the Dune session, and there were points where, there are certain backgrounds or certain interesting things that you pick, and we didn't say out front what we were picking.
And
we just picked them.
And certainly as a GM, I could say, do you feel comfortable talking about that part of your character? And if they say no, we move on, and we'll just talk about it later. You know, I mean,
Right.
you can be sensitive to the fact that somebody wants a little secret that's their own. You know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to reveal a full background in a session 0.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just give enough to, you know, this is what my character is. This is what they're about. You don't need to know the whole history. You don't need to know, you know, they're out to avenge their brother, or they're out to avenge their parents, or their parent is the BBEG, or
Mm-hmm.
what, you know. You don't need to know any of that stuff, you know. As part of the session 0. So there are secrets that can be kept, but I do see Paul's point, because some people are very, you know, here's everything about my character, so I know what, you know, where I'm going to fit in the story. You don't have to do that. You can, but I think that's more of a personal choice. I think as long as you communicate with you know, your GM, you should be good. You don't necessarily have to reveal everything to the other players.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair point. Okay. All right, so Paul admits that his third and last point is the least important, but he says, I personally like not knowing what the rest of the group is playing character-wise until the game. It's part of the fun. And I can see that. I mean, I understand that. But, you know, my response to that would be, well, I mean, you're not really going to know what anybody's playing until you sit around the table and do episode 0 either. So either way, the rubber's going to meet the road at some point, whether it's going to be in episode 0 or whether it's going to be episode 1. So, you know,
it's just a number. Right?
It's just a number. If you don't have an episode 0 and you sit down, then you learn what everybody's going to play. If you do have an episode 0, you sit down and you learn what everybody's going to play.
Yeah, but he also is saying that you're learning about it dramatically.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Rather than mechanically in this is yours, this is yours, this is your character. You're learning about it dramatically as it naturally comes up at the scene.
Okay, that's fair. I was minimizing his point. You're right.
But as a counterpoint, we actually mentioned this before. You know, you don't do the session 0, and everybody comes to the table with a low hit point magic user.
Right. Well, then you run an Ars Magica game using the Dungeons and Dragons rules.
But I mean, you get that. I mean, it's you know.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with session 0s, but I can't help but think that there was a game that we ran as an Ars Magica game between me and I think I talked about it when we talked about multiple GMs, where Sandy, a friend of ours, Sandy and I ran Ars Magica game, but we were tag team GMing, and we both had secrets from each other.
Yes.
And I didn't know what he was trying to do, and he didn't know what I was trying to do, and the game fell apart because. Yeah,
GMs can't keep
secrets from each
can't
other.
do that.
No.
I mean, unless you're doing the model that you and Tom did. Although technically you weren't keeping secrets. You were just surprising each other with a cliffhanger.
Right.
Which is a little different. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so there you have it. So I think that's all that there is to be said about episode 0. You know, there are a lot of videos online about episode 0. So if after watching this you're still not really quite sure what it's all about, or you want to learn more, you can watch folks like Ginny Dye, who works for Wizards of the Coast. She puts together some great videos for Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, and any other role-playing themed podcasts will have something on episode 0. So you know, you can be sure to check those out. So, what do you guys think? What would you like to do as the next episode?
Well, I think it would be fun to do non-traditional genres.
Non-traditional genres and settings. Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea.
Because there's a lot of stuff that I've been thinking of lately. Planet of the Apes, I've been waiting for that to come out. There's a background setting for that. And you've been doing a lot of really unconventional stuff lately. You did something just recently based on yacht rock.
Yacht rock,
and
yes.
And I never would have thought of that in a million years, but that's a brilliant just the barest of ideas, and just flesh an entire game out of it, which was great. So I think that'd be a lot of fun to talk about.
All right, what do you think, Mike? You want to do non-traditional settings and genres?
That sounds good. We can do that, absolutely.
All right, great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for our talk about running or participating in an episode 0. Next time on Grognards of Gaming, please join us when the Grognards talk about non-traditional genres and settings. So we will see you then, and thanks for tuning in. So long, everybody. And Paul would say, happy gaming.